Lili, and I am the Youth and Family Programs Educator at Urban Adamah. At Urban Adamah, we strive to connect people to the earth in various capacities. At this time, of course, we can't be on the farm, so we thought that we would do our best to talk about how we can bring the magic of the farm to our backyards. So I'm really excited today to join two of my dear friends and colleagues, Carly and Katie, to go on a walk of our backyards and talk about how we can grow food, how we can create ecosystems, and how we can connect with the land in our very own backyards, and how you can bring what we are doing here to your own backyard. So a little bit of history about the land that I'm standing on right now. My house is located in Berkeley, California, which is the unceded territory of the Chochenyo Ohlone people who are still striving and fighting for recognition of connection to this land at this time. So I'm grateful to be taking care of this land right now. So I moved here about a year ago, and when I first moved here, what I understood was that before I was here, the whole backyard was just covered in blackberries. So if we can start with a backyard like that, you can too. And before I was here, my housemate had gone through and cleared out all the blackberries, so I didn't really have to do that part, and just covered the whole backyard with a ton of wood chips. So the first thing we had to do was sort of clear a bunch of the wood chips and make space for beds, and then start building the soil. And so my number one tip that I could give to anybody who is starting with a backyard from scratch is to really tap into the free compost drop-off that we have the privilege to get here in Berkeley. People have mixed feelings about that compost, but if you're gardening on a budget, it's a really, really great way to go. And also the free tool library. All you have to do is get a library card. All you have to do is get a library card, which you should do anyways, and then you have access to any tool that you can possibly imagine, and you can just start working on your backyard from there. So from there, what you'd want to do is just start thinking about your design. In your backyard, you have so much space for creativity. You can build beds any shape you want. You can try one thing and do another thing. You can create a space that is good for growing food and also hanging out. It really just depends on what you're trying to go for in your backyard. So here we wanted to create space to grow as much food as we can, to bring in pollinators, to plant native plants, and to also have space to hang out. So with that, let's go on a walk and see what's out here. Welcome to my backyard. Let's start with the perennials. One of the biggest things that I learned probably as a garden educator and working in farms and gardens and schools was that as much as you want to plant plants that you eat, you also want to have plants around that are year-round bloomers, and that can satisfy you all year round. So I think one of the first things that I did was start to plant a bunch of perennials on the outskirts of the backyard. And this is the space where you can plant stuff that is really good for beneficial insects, things that flower. I tried to really focus on native plants because I think they're super fun and interesting and like belong in this land, and also medicinal plants. So let's take a walk and see what's here. This plant is a plant called lamb's ear, which is really fun to plant, especially if you have kids. I remember being a kid and discovering lamb's ear for the first time, and I swear I could spend hours in front of the lamb's ear and just like petting it. It's a really fun plant. Another thing I tried to focus on when I was planting stuff on the outsides was planting as much just sensory rich plants as I could. So this is a plant that's called pineapple sage, which grows really, really well, and it smells like pineapple, and it's just really fun, and you can make teas out of it, and it's just really good. Another thing that we have here is some lemon verbena, and this lemon verbena is just coming out of its winter dormant stage, so it's a little small but mighty for sure, and it's a really good plant for making teas, and it helps you boost your energy and just feel really good. So who can use a little bit of that right now? One of these that you might recognize is white sage, which is a native plant to this area, and again, you can dry it, burn it, and it just makes you feel really good and feel just at peace. This plant here is one of my favorites. I was hoping that it would bloom by the time I showed it to you. It's called a Mattia poppy or a Ramnia. It's one of those fried egg. It's called a fried egg plant. If you've ever seen a flower that looks like a fried egg, it's probably this one. And it's also native to this land, and it's just one of my favorites. It's just really fun. Cool. We can come around this way. Again, this is another really fun sensory plant. It's called sticky monkey flower. It'll probably bloom in the next few months. This garden is about to pop off. It's, you know, in its winter stage, but it'll get there. And it's actually really sticky, so it's just really fun if you have people who are wanting to explore the backyard. This is a really fun plant to be able to plant. The cool thing about native plants is that native plants love native soils, so you really don't have to do a lot of augmenting to your land, to your soil, because the plants are already adapted to be able to grow in the soil that you have in your backyard. So it's another really good thing to consider when you're thinking about like resources and what you're putting in your inputs to the soil around you. Just want to point out those mushrooms that are there. The mushrooms are also really loving this space. It's really interesting. When it was raining, all these mushrooms just popped up all over the yard, and then yesterday we had a sunny day and they all just like fried. So they're just like kind of fun to watch and just see what comes up. I don't know anything about those mushrooms, but they're pretty cool. You can start to see, this is sort of a newer planting, and I tried to continue with the theme of, actually, there's only a couple of native plants here. There's a native manzanita bush that's over there, which is fun. It has edible berries and really pretty white flowers. There's also motherwort here, which is medicinal. I think it helps with headaches and fever. And then a bunch of poppies. And I started to put some fun strawberries here. Strawberries are really fun if you're looking for an edible ground cover. Something that is fun to think about when you're placing your plants is just the height. So you want some tall flowers, you want some medium, you want some ground. And how cool is it to be able to have some ground flowers that you can eat? Yeah, another thing to note is throughout the garden there's these flowers called alyssum. They're these tiny white flowers that are over here and around back. And alyssum is a really small but mighty plant that brings in a lot of really awesome beneficial insects that help with plants like kale and broccoli and other edible foods such as that often are attacked by aphids. So they're a really, really great plant to put in no matter where you're gardening to help bring in those beneficial insects and start to diversify your ecosystem. Over here is really fun because this is sort of where you get into my little kids space. So around here, there's a bunch of smatterings of just little flower plants. Again, they're not yet in bloom. I was hoping they'd be in bloom, but they're not. But all of these flowers that you see here, poppies, lavender mist, bachelor button, sunflowers, there's some borage, which is an edible flower down there. All of these were seeded by kids. And so we seeded these back at Urban Adamah, and we just had a bunch extra. So I got to take them and plant them in my backyard. And now I get to think of all the kids that planted those flower seeds. So if you ever thought that kids can't plant things, they really can. And here they are, healthy and alive, and about to make my backyard really beautiful. This over here is our herb spiral, which is really exciting. I've always wanted to put an herb spiral in. Herb spirals are a really great option if you don't have a lot of space in your backyard because it allows you to have more growing space by making it taller and longer. So it's also really cool because a lot of the herbs that you put in an herb spiral often just spread out all over your yard. So an herb spiral helps to sort of like contain all of the plants that you put inside of it. Another really cool thing about herb spirals is that technically they actually offer really awesome microclimates. So if you think about it, the plants that are up here, the soil that's up here is much deeper than the soil that is down here. And so there's a different amount of root depth for each plant that you put here. Also, if you think about it, the sun rises in the east over here and sets over there. So this whole stretch of plants has more time with the sun. So you can think about that as you put your plantings in. Another cool thing about herbs, you know, when all of this was happening and shelter in place was rising, I went out and got a bunch of herbs that I knew were really good for calming the nervous system. So we have lavender, chamomile, oregano, all sorts of things. And then some edible flowers for splashes of color in here. So if you have a small amount of space, an herb spiral is an awesome way to go. All right, now we get to the meat, the juice of the garden. So this whole space here is where we have all of our edible plants. So I want to recognize that I have a decent amount of space back here. So I have a lot of ability to plant a whole bunch of things, but my hope is that you can sort of take the sort of style that I used to plant in these beds, even if you have a smaller space. Because I learned and tried to implement a lot of interplanting and companion planting in the process of planting these beds. So even if you have one garden box, you can hopefully take some of these things and be able to plant them in your garden box. So over here, we have a whole stretch of potatoes, which is really fun. Potatoes might seem like a strange thing to put in your garden if you only have a small space, but you can expand the amount of growing space that you have by doing some companion planting and some interplanting. So, make that a car. Over here to the side of the potatoes, you can see we also have some onions. We put these onions in all the way back in October. There's onions and garlic. So they're still growing, and again, they don't need that much space, so you can grow them right next to the potatoes. And I learned recently that actually onions help flavor the potatoes, so if you plant them right next to each other, it's actually a really awesome companion. Same thing with on the side, I made this little teeny tiny little bed that has parsley and spinach and cilantro and also chamomile. And I also learned that those things also help flavor your potatoes, so hopefully these are the juiciest potatoes you've ever had. And again, they don't need that much space, so you can really plant all of those things together. Chamomile is really fun. Again, it's medicinal, and it attracts a lot of beneficial insects for your flowering plants. Want to point out this little pot that has our mint in it. Mint is a plant that is amazing, and it really loves to spread out. So I get really nervous when I plant mint, so I just put it in this pot. And we planted this like 2 weeks ago, and it's like already doubled in size if you think about it. So the pot just helps it to not spread out all over your garden. Come on up. Back here you can see the end of last season's peas. I just wanted to have it in here for texture for you. But you can see again a space that is technically small, but that you can use to plant a whole lot of different things. So on the ends are these snapdragons, which are really good to plant in the winter. They're a winter blooming flower and bring in beneficial insects. Plus they have this awesome trip where they love to talk. So if you didn't know that snapdragons could talk, now you know. Inside here I have some beans growing. Beans might be a weird thing to plant next to peas, but my plan is to take these peas down and I'm going to plant these cucumbers here. And again, we don't have a lot of space, so I'm actually going to practice trellising cucumbers, which is an awesome thing to do for vining plants. You can build a trellis and have those plants climb up, so that instead of taking up space, they can grow up vertically. And the beans are here because they don't take up a lot of space and they fix the soil. They add nitrogen into the soil. So if you think about it, cucumbers might take a lot more. They're like a fruiting plant, so they take a lot more nutrients from the soil. So the beans sort of like feed it back in. And I just planted these lettuce in between because I'll harvest them before I even plant the cucumbers. So you can put them in there. Over here is a really fun bed as well. We have all different kinds of tomatoes and another opportunity for interplanting and companion planting. So something that you can think about when you're planting is how much time the plant that you put in takes to get to the point where you can eat from it, how much space it takes up, how tall it is, how wide it is, the roots, if it's a plant that really digs into the soil and takes a lot of nutrients that way, or if it's a plant that doesn't have a lot of root or an intensive root system. Those things are good to put together. So I planted these tomatoes. These are some of my favorite varieties. There's everyone's favorite sun golds, which are those really awesome yellow teeny tiny yellow tomatoes, and then some cherry red tomatoes, and then I put some Cherokee purple tomatoes in here because those grow really well. And then in between I planted these lettuce plants because the lettuce will really only take a few weeks to head out. So even before these tomatoes get really tall, I'll probably already harvest the lettuce. So I might even do that twice before the tomatoes get really tall. And then in front, you can't really see probably from there, but I actually planted some onions in front of them. And the onions, again, they only take up a little bit of space, so they're a really great thing to put in between your tomato plants. You can also do carrots, radishes, things like that that don't take a lot of space and that grow really quickly, although the onions take a long time. You'll notice that around some of the beds I put these hoops in, and I did this because I actually planted some of these summer crops a little bit early. So I got these little wires to put over the beds, and then I cover them with a little bit of shade cloth that you can get really cheap. And the shade cloth, or the row cover, actually helps to increase the temperature underneath the cloth and over the plants, so it creates like a little mini greenhouse effect. And that allows you to plant things a little bit earlier and helps them sort of get on their feet before, even in these cold winter times. Some peppers, and I planted some more lettuce in the back, and eventually I'm going to take those out and put basil when they're ready. Really excited about that. But I have this space, so I planted some more lettuce. And then on the outsides, there's these really yummy zinnia plants. Zinnias are a really funky flower. I didn't used to like them, so I thought they were just like poof balls. But if you ever watch them for a really long time, you'll notice that the butterflies and the bees love them. They've got this really awesome like firework landing pad flower that they can just land on, and they make these little flowers that they can just dip their tongues in, and they really love them. So if you watch that, you'll fall in love with zinnias. They're a really great thing to plant in your garden to bring in beneficial insects. We have this bed over here, which is just a mixture of mixed greens. We have arugula and then matsuoka greens, which are just spicy greens, and they're just really fun because you can just enjoy them while you wait for the other plants to grow. And here's an experiment that I did where I tried to just like put in little pops of edible flowers because I thought that would be fun. Kind of looks silly, but it's something to try. So here you'll find some calendula, which is an edible flower, and also these pansies, which are also edible. And the garden educator in me wants to tell you that as much as they're just really fun because you get to eat the flowers and they add a little bit of like tang to whatever you're doing, every color of every vegetable or fruit that you eat also represents a different vitamin and nutrient. So they're really fun, and you're also sneaking in different vitamins into your salad with every different color that you add. So just a fun thing to note. So yeah, that's our garden. Really excited to share it with you, and I hope that you can take some of this into whatever scale that you're planting and whatever you're doing at home. And excited to be able to see your garden someday.
Hello, my name is Carly. I am the Creative and Marketing Manager at Urban Adamah, and I used to be the Assistant Farm Manager at Urban Adamah. And welcome to my backyard in North Oakland and Rockridge, where we're going to be talking about a few topics today. I'll look at my hand because they're written down. We're going to talk about bed structure and soil, drip irrigation, what a mixed vegetable garden in an urban setting looks like, pest management, and compost. And behind the camera is Matt Zimbalist, who used to be the site manager at Urban Adamah, and he's going to talk us through some things also. He's my partner in crime in the backyard and in life. Okay, so welcome to the southern half of my garden, where we have 6 beds that we dug when we moved in. And I should mention that we are actually renting this space. So this is all doable for renting a home, depending on obviously your landlord's preferences. But it's obviously permanent, and some of it can be taken with you, like the drip irrigation and the hoops and the netting, and we'll talk about that more. But we're first going to talk about the soil structure and kind of building your soil up to get it ready for the first planting in this beautiful springtime. I use a French intensive model of planting, which is one model for digging beds, and there are many models. This kind of incorporates amending your soil, growing your soil, and getting it ready for the longevity of plants growing in it rather than just really focusing on a single crop. So I'm building soil while I'm growing food, which is great. In this bed, I'll just kind of cruise through what is planted. We have intercropping of sweet alyssum and a brassica. This is lacinato kale. Sweet alyssum and all brassicas, but work together really well as a companion planter because the sweet alyssum ward off the pests that usually affect brassicas. Next to it we have a bed of collards that were planted yesterday. Next to this we have half a bed of cilantro and half a bed of parsley. Here we have daikon radish in the front with purple top turnips in the back. And this is beautiful bed of arugula. And this bed, on our last bed, we have bunching onions in the back, and we'll be planting leeks in the front. So this is the south half of the garden. And Matt, how many square feet do you think this is about?
About 300.
So in about 300 square feet, we're going to yield a lot of food out of this space. We're going to move toward the north half of the backyard and garden. You'll see that there's one bed of spinach planted over here. There are 3 beds over here. We have fruit trees interspersed between, which we'll talk about. And then we have our last 6 beds over here. So in total, we have, I think, around 18 beds, all equipped with drip irrigation, bird netting, hoops, and hopefully they're planted by now because this is a really fertile time to get things planted in the ground, a really important time of the year, of the farming season. Okay, so we're next going to talk about drip irrigation. I'm actually going to turn it over to Matt to talk about drip irrigation because he is an expert in this, and we're going to talk about what it means to put drip in a place that you're renting, how to travel with drip, what drip irrigation actually does, and why people use drip.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm going to talk a little bit about drip irrigation. As Carly mentioned, I did this site management at Urban Adamah for a few years, getting the site up and running, and I'm a landscape contractor now, and I do a lot of farm installs. So I do love gardening and love the idea of gardening, so I'm happy to share a little bit of knowledge with you today. So we're using just a pretty basic system here. We're using 1/2-inch poly emitter. It's actually running right now. These 2 beds aren't prepped yet, but it's a simple, cost-effective, time-effective way of irrigating that saves a lot of water. So that's what we're using. It's a little bit funky if you are a renter because you're buying your system and you're not necessarily going to be there forever, but it is a possibility of kind of altering these systems a little bit as long as you use a similar bed size in the future and trying to salvage most of your parts. We're just using a really basic connection to your hose here. This is just a battery powered timer. It's just something I pulled off a job, so we were able to use it for free. And we have a 25 PSI pressure reducing filter on there. You're going to want to reduce your pressure if you're going into drip. 25 is a good amount for a backyard garden like this, and you always want to filter on it just because there are some particulates and particles that come through city water. A few components I want to point out on the drip system. You got 2 different types of line running simultaneously here. The ones running through the bed, those are the ones with the emitters. So ours are spaced 12 inches apart, and I think these ones are doing about 1 gallon an hour per hole. So we space them about 12 inches apart with this kind of spacing, but each one's a little bit different. If your spacing between your emitters is tighter, you're gonna have a smaller reach, so it's just something to keep in mind. The other thing we have going on is we have supply line. This has no holes in it. That's just carrying the water out to our whole system. We're probably maxed out on what we're doing here. We're doing this all off of one line just because we have the one timer and the one hose bib out here. If you were designing a garden this big, I'd probably recommend using a hardwired timer so you can have a little bit more control and flexibility, but for a simple low-cost system, this is working pretty well for us.
Right, so we're doing a mixed vegetable garden here, which is one of the most important components of and principles of farming to me, because as I said before, we're building soil, and to build soil you need to have lots of a diversification of crop in the ground to build that soil. We also, in that, brings a lot of different pests to our land. So there's not, and also that we're in an urban setting, we're dealing with lots of different pests than we would be dealing with maybe on a large-scale commercial farm. So each variety of crop has its pests that it likes to attract. And as you see here, we have netted with bird netting and hoops all of our planted beds. And if you move over here over to the topsoil, you can see kind of the difference between some of the crop, how it's grown, and what's happened over here. So we actually had a pretty bad bird mishap where the blue jays is what I suspect came in, and I planted a lot of plants, and they came in overnight and kind of decimated all of the transplants, which is really bad because this is like the most fragile state that a plant is when you're transplanting it from the greenhouse into the ground, and you want that to be as easeful as possible. So with a cutting green like this, we are confident that there are enough true leaves on the plant that it can come back to itself and how it would have grown. With these two beds, this was carrots and this is beets. You can see that we only have 2 surviving carrot direct sown seeds that have survived the blue jays, and more of the beets survived, but I'm going to, it's called re-sow, and fill in the skips of where the pests have damaged our crop. So pest management. We also deal with a lot of squirrel infestation here. So the squirrels really like to, someone in our neighborhood likes to feed the squirrels peanuts, and they are digging into these beautifully lofted beds that we dig with our hands and our bodies and our care to put this beautiful food in the ground, and they bury their peanuts in it, which disrupts the ground and potentially rips the plants out of the ground. So the bird netting also really helps with that. We chose to do bird netting instead of what's called remay. It's that like white stuff that goes over long beds and fields, which one helps crops kind of transition from greenhouse to outside because it keeps heat in. It also helps with pests in a different way because it doesn't have holes in it. So we chose to do this because I do overhead water sometimes when I'm in the direct seeding stage of planting, and so I overhead water for the first 5 to 7 days of direct sowing seeds as well as transplants. So that's why we chose to do this.
I'm going to talk a little bit about compost. We collectively compost all of our yard trimmings, mowings, everything we pull out of beds, as well as all of our food scraps from the house. So we have to be a little bit mindful of that. We're making sure that we're doing a good job processing all of our food waste inside, removing any stickers that may be on there, any ties, because we know it's going to go in our garden. It's a nice way of kind of bringing this lifestyle like into the kitchen. So we have 2 piles here. Our first pile that you see here is a little bit larger. This is actually our active pile, so we're basically doing like active and resting compost. They're small little windrows. I wouldn't go much smaller than this. And so the first pile I'm building, I'm kind of layering as I go, you know, greens and browns, nitrogens and carbons, adding water in there, get the right moisture content. And then the back pile in here underneath our orange tree, not touching the actual trunk, but near it, this is more of our curing compost. So this has been curing for about 3 weeks now, and we don't touch this one. So we've kind of, once we're at this stage, when I'm ready to sift through the finished compost, I'll move this one back into there, so I'll always have 2 piles going at once. And once I turn it, I'll make sure all my mix ratios feels good with the greens and browns and moistures, and then kind of cap it. and that one's curing, this one's active, and that one, when that one's done cured, we'll transfer and kind of start again. And the cool thing about, you know, building your own compost is you don't have to go out and buy it, and you know what's in it, and you can use it right back into your garden. So transportation's easier, and it's just a cool way of making that whole life cycle go around.
So as we mentioned before, we were renting this property, and these 2 raised beds were here when we moved in, and they're actually the wood is what's it called? Pressure treated wood. And you don't want to grow in raised beds with pressure treated wood because of the chemicals that will seep out of the wood and soak into the food that you're going to eat. So we decided to plant cut flowers in here to attract pollinators, to make it beautiful, and have another offering. So these 2 beds and around are all planted with beneficial flowers such as marigolds, sweet alyssum, bachelor button, and some bulbed flowers. Okay, so one really cool thing about this house when we moved in is that there were actually 6 fruit trees here that we have been tending and caring for the 8 months that we've lived here. Fruit trees are a pretty big endeavor, and you want to take care and really plan and think about how you're going to plant fruit trees, where and when, and how long you're going to be in a place to take care of them. They were pretty neglected when we got here, and so I'm going to talk you through some of the steps that we've gone through to really revive these trees so we can reap the benefits of their fruit. We have 4 stone fruit trees here, 3 in the backyard and 1 in the front. I suspect they are all peaches, as they just started to fruit. We have a citrus tree right here. It's a navel orange tree, which is beautiful and wonderful because it fruits all year long, and we get amazing oranges all year. And we have an apple tree in the front and a cherry behind us. So the things that we've been doing to kind of revive the fruit trees is what I call a donut of compost. And we give it a really healthy heaping of rich compost around it, the trunk in a donut fashion.
We also got some flowers planted in the donut there too.
Yeah, just for fun, little pop of color. And that's just to really give the fruit trees all of the nutrients that it needs to do everything that a fruit tree does. There's a lot. It produces food and a bounty of it. We've also been doing a little bit of pest management here. You can see this blue tape around the trunk of the tree. It's blue tape tied to the tree with what is called tanglefoot on it. And tanglefoot is just this really sticky material that catches ants and other critters that are crawling up and down the tree that are using it for either a home, eating off of it, or that's the only things that I could think of. Another thing that we do to nurture these trees are prune it. So we've pruned before bud break and leaf break. So you don't want to prune your trees when it gets too close to them starting to leaf and fruit, because then it would disrupt their pattern. And what we're pruning for is shape and growth of the trees. So we're ensuring that the fruit really has the optimal places to grow and that it's growing in the right shape for our space.
Okay.
So another consideration is when you're planting fruit trees is that they take a lot of water. They're water intensive plants, as fruit needs water. Trees need water to bear fruit. So depending on the season and how much rain is coming down, you want to ensure that you get about an hour of drip a week on these trees. So depending on how much it's raining or what you're watering with, you want to get a really deep soak so these roots can soak in the water.
I want to highlight some resources for you in the East Bay about where to get things. We do all of our irrigation shopping at Urban Farmer. There's a lot of irrigation supplies, but that's a really good one for novices. They'll help you build your system in ordinary times. Right now, they might be able to help you consult on the phone. It's an affordable place, and right next to it in Richmond is American Soil. That's where we'll get any of our compost if we do need to buy it, or they have, mulches and soil mixes and stuff like that. They're a pretty good resource that's affordable. Biofuel Oasis is also another really good source for homesteading needs, and we buy like our straw there for our compost, and they sold us the mushroom plugs, and they have a lot of other good resources as well as some seeds, so it's a cool place to check out as well. And yeah, there's a lot of cool local businesses supporting backyard gardeners and growers, so good to check out. And this is actually, I think, pretty manageable to do on your own with a little bit of skill, hopefully some help. And if you come into a snag and you want someone to help you out, Carly and I are willing to either help you consult on the phone briefly or by email.
Hi, I'm Katie, and I'm going to take you on a tour of my North Oakland backyard, which we lovingly call the Twin Duplex Farm. So I have a twin sister, and we both live here with our families in a duplex that we garden and farm together in our backyard. So come on in. We have our backyard garden set up in a square foot garden method. And basically it's a method that some people say can save a lot of time and a lot of space and money and water to garden in these square foots as compared to long rows of gardens. I don't know about all that, but it is a helpful method if you want to have lots of little pathways and garden in a highly densely planted area. And the basic idea is that you have a 4 by 4 foot square, and that way you can reach all of your garden from any side. You can reach 2 feet in like either direction, and it's easy to access. So you have this 4 by 4 foot square, and then you think of it as divided into 1 by 1 smaller squares, and you plant out each of those squares to a density that matches the plants that you are trying to grow. So small plants like carrots and radishes might be 16 plants in one square, and then beans and spinach and beets would be 9 plants in a square. Lettuce or chard would be 4, and then larger plants like collards or broccoli or tomatoes would be 1 per square foot. So you can see that we do that a little bit. We kind of have a hybrid. We used to do that for the first few years where we gardened here, and now we just figured out that some plants want more space and some plants actually need even less space. So we have some long rows of plants, some little groupings of plants, and we just kind of plant as densely as we feel is good for the plant to keep it both under control size-wise and pests under control, and then also still be able to plant in a fairly dense zone. If you think about planting 16 tomatoes in this one square, it would be a lot. It would be probably really too crowded for you to get in there and do anything with your tomatoes. And the tomatoes might not be so happy about it either. So what we might do is put maybe 4 or 5 tomatoes in this one square, and then underneath plant basil or dill or rows of lettuces to still have a pretty dense planting to grow as much food as possible. Another way to have an increased density using either square foot or any kind of gardening in your backyard or in your front yard maybe, would be to use a trellis. So we built this trellis out of some electrical conduit piping. We make trellises out of almost anything. We have some other ones that are made out of large gauge chicken wire and fence posting. We use this one for our sugar snap peas. We've also used this with pole beans. We've also made like triangular pole bean trellises out of old bamboo. And just have like kind of like a pyramid shape to have a trellis. We've also used our trellises for cucumbers, for pickling cucumbers, lemon cucumbers, and even winter squash. We had a trellis that's made out of chicken wire, and we put boards across it to grow our winter squash, our acorn squash. We've also grown trombetta squash up the trellis. And that's just a great way to have a vertical crop, and then you can have another crop down below to grow more. Another feature of our backyard is our rainwater barrel. Our barrel is 205 gallons. We got it many years ago, about 10 years ago, through a program with the city of Oakland where we only had to pay for the taxes, and we signed a form that said that we would have this rain barrel in the city of Oakland forever. They can cost like over $300, but many times the city or your county or even like the East Bay Mud will have programs where you can get them as long as you promise to use them there. It's really easy to set up. You can just find your downspout and put it right below. We don't have ours directly in line with the downspout, mostly just because we didn't want it in front of our window. So we just maneuvered the downspout over to the side to put it right here in the middle of our yard, the middle of the back of the house. We have this plumbing pipe that directs the water off the roof into the barrel. Up at the top, you may or may not be able to see it, but there's a mesh screen covering the hole between the tube and the barrel to catch any debris that might come off the roof. And when we first installed it, we made sure that the ground underneath was nice and level. You want to put it up high off the ground, maybe about a foot. We have ours a little bit higher just so we can easily get our watering can underneath and the spigot. So we have a spigot. What else? Oh, I wanted to say that many people have like a first flush diversion tube at the top, and that really means is that you don't want to catch the very first rain that comes off your roof after summer and fall have come because of all the dirt and dust that has collected up there. So we don't have one of those diverters for the first flush. So what we do is that we just take off the tube and then place it back on before that second and all the winter rains come. It fills up pretty quickly. It's 205 gallons, but it fills up pretty quickly with all the water coming off of our rooftop. And then in the springtime, we use all of the rainwater to start our seeds and our young seedlings. It takes a while for it to empty. We like to just use it as a slow way to like welcome and wake up our garden in the spring as we use up all the water before we turn on our irrigation system. This part on our tour is to talk about a few of the perennial vegetables that we have growing. This one is a purple asparagus. Asparagus likes rich, well-drained soil. So when you're planting your first asparagus, you should add a lot of compost and then annual additions of compost every year after that. It prefers a pH around 7. When you're first planting it, it'll grow these little stalks, and you don't want to harvest any the first year, and then just 2 or 3 maybe the second year, and a few more after that. And that's to allow the root system to develop and get really nice and strong. An asparagus plant can grow for 10 to 15 years and provide you lots of shoots. We've let these grow just as the last ones of our season. And you can see that they're growing nice and fern-like fronds after they shoot out from the asparagus that you might be familiar with. Asparagus doesn't last very long once you harvest it, so after you clip it, when it's nice and tight, you should eat it that very next day, and then it'll continue growing in your yard for many, many years. Once the ferns die back, then you'll want to clip it all to the ground and give it a nice heavy mulch for over the winter time. Another plant that we have growing along our fence line here is a chayote squash. I just learned actually that you cannot just eat the fruits of the chayote, but you can also eat the shoots, the leaves, and even the roots have some tubers that you can eat. Ours took a while to establish, so I don't want to dig it up and get at the roots or anything like that. It's probably not growing in the best spot here, squeezed along the fence, but it's kind of an experiment, so we've just let it grow. They can grow like 30 feet in 1 year. So you might want to have a lot more space, but we have it here along the fence just so it can grow up this fence. A single plant could have over 100 fruits. The fruits are these round, zucchini-like squash. They're round, like pear-shaped, lime green colored, and you can eat them just like zucchini or cucumbers, or even if they're later in the season, you eat them like potatoes. And then the fruit, that squash, is actually what you plant. So if this plant grew 100, you could say eat a bunch, store a bunch, and then give a bunch to the neighbors. You could want to chill them as you're keeping them to eat, or else they might start sprouting and growing, on your countertop. We got this one from a neighbor who had plenty to share, and it's just kind of fun to see it grow back every year and grow up the fence and start sprouting. We also have this little spot over here where we have a few other perennial growing fruits and vegetables. One thing I'll just mention, this is comfrey. It makes beautiful delicate flowers, and you can feed it to your chickens. This is a ground cherry. It's kind of, I think it's related to a tomatillo or a tomato. It has husk, little cherry type fruits. You can see them starting to grow right here. And then we have this vining pepper in the back. That's another experiment. It's a perennial pepper. It has grown for many years in that spot with very little care. You can see the delicate small purple flowers. It's super spicy, so I don't really like super spicy food, so again, this is another sharing plant. I don't know anything else about it. He's trying this out. Perennial vining pepper. Here's a dried up fruit actually from last year. Kind of looks like a habanero. It's just fun, and of course, it's the one that's like growing like madhouse back here. Another thing I wanted to show you is that we have some freshly planted artichokes. We had an artichoke plant that grew until about like 5-6 feet tall, almost that wide, and then you cut it back every year, and then it'll restart and re-sprout. Ours, we had to plant some new ones. Ours just had reached its lifespan, so these are fresh ones here. What you're actually eating, or the artichoke, is the undeveloped flower bud. And if you let that bud continue, you want to eat it before it starts to open up, or else it'll be too tough. If you let it grow to flower, which we usually do at the end of every season, we let some grow to flower. It looks like a bright purple thistle flower. It's really just a beautiful plant, but super tasty. Another fun plant to have growing in your yard that we like to grow back here. All right, so this is another stop on our backyard tour. These are our chickens. We built the entire chicken coop and run ourselves, as you can probably tell. And some key things for you if you are thinking about building a chicken zone in your yard is to use some welded chicken fence that's really small gauge, like 1/4 inch to maybe just a slightly bigger. When we started, we only had this small gauge at the bottom, and at the top we had larger typical chicken wire. And while that was okay, it helped to keep most predators out, like hawks or raccoons, which is why you want to use such small wire. but it let the songbirds come in, so little sparrows and things were coming in and eating the food and like pooping in the chicken run. So we redid it, so now they can't get in. So when you're building this, you want to dig down 6 inches to a foot and put the wire underneath some rocks and the soil so that predators can't get in from underneath. Ours is fully enclosed, again for predators. Other people will have the top open, but we chose to have it fully enclosed, just based on our neighbors' experiences telling us stories about that, and to keep our chickens safer. Some other things you'll notice inside their run is we have some structures that we made for them out of 2x4s and other scrap wood as roosts, so they can sit up high and enjoy themselves, be comfortable, birds. Some other things about our coop, which we built completely out of like scrap wood that we got from the neighborhood and various places, is to always include some vents at the top and around on the sides in order to let the ammonia from the chicken poop get out of their coop. We also have a little feature where when you're cleaning the coop, you can close the door, and so that they can't get into the coop. It's attached by this wire, and then for the most part, we leave it up so they can get in and out from that ramp there from the run into the coop. This is the nest box. We wanted it on the outside, easily accessible, so you didn't have to go into the run. You don't even have to open the coop to get to all the eggs. Inside the nest box, we have some wooden eggs and some straw to make a little nice nest for them. The wooden eggs are to show them where to lay, and so that if they ever peck on an egg, they'll peck at, which they do sometimes if they're just being curious or eating the eggs. But then you put the wooden egg in there and they peck on the wooden egg, and then they stop pecking at their other eggs because the wooden egg is so hard and it's not pleasant for them to peck on the wooden egg. We also have their food and water right inside the door of the run, so that's really easily accessible. We feed them organic layer pellets, and they eat about 1 pound per chicken a week. So a 50-pound bag will last quite a long time. We have always gotten our chickens, which this is our 3rd flock that we've had at this house. We've always gotten them as pullets, or teenage chickens, which is about 8 weeks old, because at that time they don't need a heat lamp or anything to stay warm. And it's easy to get pullets. We've both gotten them off Craigslist from a farmer in Santa Rosa, and recently from the Alameda County 4-H group. You can find them probably on Craigslist too, and they sell chicks and pullets of all different ages and varieties. They start laying at about 20 weeks, or when they can get about 14 to 16 hours of sunlight. That's what they need. The sunlight is related to their egg laying, so as the days get longer, they'll lay more and more eggs. And over the winter, they still are laying eggs, but very few because there's not enough sunlight. It just takes a long time to get up to their 14 hours of sunlight that they need in order to lay an egg. A high-laying egg layer will lay an egg about once every 25 hours. So with our flock of 4, we get about 2.5 eggs a day in the spring and summer. In the summer, we might get 3 or 4 every day too, as the days are longer. Chickens are social animals, so you want at least 3, and just so that they are more happy and together. And we're gonna go in and meet them. So just 1 second with my little helper here. So we'll see, maybe they'll stay up there, but we're gonna introduce you. Yes. Olive, tell them who this is.
This one is,
That's Zuzu Heart.
yeah, that's Zuzu Heart.
She is a black star.
Yes, Black Star.
How about right here?
This one is Lady Gray.
Lady Gray is a speckled Sussex. Then we have Roxy Rainbow on the edge here. She's a barred rock. And we have another black star in the middle. That's Ziggy Stardust. These three kinds, the black star, the speckled Sussex, and the barred rock, all lay brown eggs. So it's kind of hard to tell who's laying what egg, but they're all brown. Some are a little bit darker and more speckled. Other chickens we've had in the past have laid white eggs, and we've even had an Americana who laid blue-green eggs. Yeah, so these are our chickens.
Yes, and I'm feeding them right now. With little flowers.
Here is our backyard compost zone. You have a two-bin system. We're quite lazy about our compost. We put most kitchen scraps and all of the scraps from our chickens in here, along with some garden waste, and then when it gets full we turn it over into our second bin, and that's about it. It takes a little while longer than if you were really trying to do a hot compost pile, but it also works because I just sifted the bin that had been sitting there untouched for a few months, and I got all of this lovely compost out from about maybe 2 squares of the compost bin. So it comes apart, that black one, and it was about 2 squares high of compost, and I got all of this compost. You can see that there is still some stuff that we will have to put back in and compost later, but it works really well, and now I'm going to put it in my garden bed where I just cut down some cover crops.
Hardest work I ever done, working on a farm. Easiest work I ever done, swinging my true love's arm.